Let's talk about British politics. It seems as if there's a bit of a spat brewing between Reform and the Conservatives, partly to do with, on one minute, Kemi Badenoch is angry about Reform claiming the membership is lower, Tory membership is lower than Reform's. The next, she's complaining that Nigel Farage is getting too much airtime on television. Tom, I mean, the two parties are, bumping up together in the polls. I mean, there is the potential for something quite significant here, but it hasn't quite got to that point yet where Reform are overtaking them.
No, absolutely. I mean, there have been some polls, some kind of outlier polls recently that would suggest that really is the direction of travel, but it is early days. If you look at the kind of numbers that we're looking at currently, you do have a kind of fascinating, almost like three-way split between Labour, the Tories and Reform in many of the polls that are coming out. And it really points to a really interesting question, which is what's going to happen to essentially the kind of anti-Labour vote, the right of British politics broadly defined, because at the moment they are very much essentially vying for that particular crown. I think it wasn't a great Christmas and New Year for the Conservatives, a lot of kind of unforced errors, I think it's fair to say, over that spat over the Reform membership numbers. Totally unnecessary fight to pick, which completely blew up in their faces. Yet at the same time, they still remain the kind of much larger party. So how this pans out will be really interesting. And it does seem like the kind of conventional wisdom is that the longer that vote remains split, the more, regardless of what's going to happen with Labour and their unpopularity, the more that will allow Labour a bit of a kind of stay of execution going into another election. But all very much to play for. And the one thing that is definitely abundantly clear at the moment is just how unpopular this Labour government has become incredibly quickly. It's not a truism to say that there is usually a honeymoon period when governments come in, and it was non-existent. It was about 30 seconds long this time around. And as some of the kind of big mega MRP polls, as they're called in the jargon, that have come out in recent days from More in Common, if the general election was held today, they reckon they'd lose about 200 of their seats. So this is there's everything to play for, definitely. Labour are incredibly unpopular, but you've got an opposition, shall we say, which still remains very bitterly split right now.
Yeah, it seems as if, Joe, Labour can do no right. It's just about every area they, every new policy they announce is met with derision and, quite rightly, a lot of pushback. The budget was a complete disaster and there's still protests over it from farmers. Think about, you've written this week about Bridget Phillipson's disastrous education policies. I mean, it does feel like everything, what could go wrong has gone wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not accidental, and things that are going accidentally wrong for the Labour Party. This is not a question of circumstances or, misfortune or them making, accidental errors, as you might describe Kemi Badenoch having made. This is what they really think. Bridget Phillipson was planning, it emerged this week, to cut back on the free speech bill for universities. Even before she got into office, this plan for curricular reform, which will basically take English literature and English history off the school curriculum in favour of diversity, which is a complete act of educational vandalism. This is not a kind of unforced error. This is what Bridget Phillipson really thinks. They have no sense of what it means to bring about economic growth, no sense of what it means to have a good education system. It's truly terrible. But, on Kemi Badenoch, I have to say I was a fan of hers. I was pleased when she took over the leadership of the Conservative Party. I thought this might mean a positive change for British politics. So it's been really quite embarrassing to have to watch her come out and make these statements about reforms, membership figures, and Nigel Farage getting too much airtime. And it just seems like it's a panicked response to reform's rising popularity. And, I think this is a bit of panic setting in amongst both Labour and Conservative. It's not without reason, because all the political momentum does seem to be with reform and with Nigel Farage as we're heading into the new year. And I think the problem for Kemi Badenoch is the Tory party were in power for the past 14 years. So when people are looking even at things like the rape gangs that we've just been talking about, all the time it comes back to the obvious question, well, you had 14 14 years when you were in power, why on earth didn't you do something about those things then? Why wasn't the free speech bill properly passed and already in law so that Labour couldn't wipe these things away so easily? So I think, as sympathetic as I might wish to be regarding Kemi Badenoch, it's very hard to see how she can make a proper steer of this. It really does seem to me like the Conservative Party is just going to collapse.
And yeah, it's as if the unravelling of the Labour government has also made people forget or have short memories of how bad the previous Conservative administration really was, and how sort of unmoored and pointless it was, particularly in the Rishi Sunak years. But Tom, I mean, reform are coming for Labour as much as they are for the Tories, surely, especially in a lot of kind of red wall seats, and you could even see some sort of tactical changes, in how reform is selling its policies. I mean, you think about like Richard Tice coming out in favour of nationalising Thames Water. That's not something you expect to hear from a kind of someone who normally poses as an arch Thatcherite.
No, absolutely. And you can tell that they've probably got the red wall in mind with some of these announcements, with some of the ways that they're trying to present themselves. Now, you are right to say, I think they came second in about 98 constituencies, and it's something like 89 of those are Labour seats. And if you look at how the polls are looking at the moment, you could be projected to really have a kind of string of Portillo moments at the next election, with Labour cabinet ministers falling, they're losing their seats to Reform MPs potentially. It is very early days, it's fair to say. Various kind of Farage-led parties previously have got to a certain point and then sort of receded. But the fact that he's kind of more in it for the long haul could be quite significant this time around. And also the fact that the Conservatives, certainly over the past couple of weeks, have handed him sort of one own goal after another. It is early days. I mean, Kemi Badenoch's only really been in post since November, even though it feels like a hell of a lot longer given how quickly things move these days. But as I say, I will just come back to that kind of one certainty in all of this, which is that the old order is over, really. I mean, the fact that we had this Labour majority of such a tremendous size last time around, we all know was kind of a fluke. I mean, it was a combination of our electoral system, which is very unrepresentative, and the fact that the Tory party collapsed. They won 34% of the vote. Turnout was 60%. It was an incredibly thin mandate that they received from the country. And we're kind of back into the position where we were almost before Boris Johnson took over the Conservatives, and then the Brexit party stood down in all those constituencies, where people are just up for grabs in a way that they weren't previously. The old loyalties are dying, even if the new ones are yet to properly kind of be formed, if you like. So whatever else is happening, we're not going back. And that's filled with a lot of potential for, breaking up these kind of old party elites and something new and interesting happening, either within those parties themselves or increasingly, it looks like, from outside of them.
But I do think that Labour are acting very defensively in the face of the threat from reform. And I think you can see this in three different things. I mean, there's been very disturbing talk about cancelling some of the local elections, which is supposed to be coming up this year. There's a huge number of new quangos that have been put in place since Labour came into office. And you look at the appointments to the House of Lords. I mean, Labour seems very determined to stuff that second chamber full of its own preferred people. And my worry is that in acting defensively to thwart a threat from reform, they're stifling democracy, the democratic processes that we have, and they're trying to put in place things which, could make sure that the blob or the establishment view of the world, if you like, continues, even if reform were to have more of an electoral success, which, I really hope they do have.